Why is it no res?
That's just on here. Good morning, everyone. How come it feels like it's moving away from you?
I don't know.
Hi, thank you all for joining us here this morning on a beautiful June chilly morning. I love the weather. This has been such a beautiful time to get some rain and to feel cooler. I don't know. I'm really enjoying it. So, yeah. As we begin this morning, I want to invite you to, well, first, I guess we could introduce ourselves. Actually, I'll invite you and then we'll introduce ourselves. The question, I would love to hear from you guys. And I got to move this down, I think, or how do I? Well, first, I guess we could introduce ourselves. Nope, that's not going to work. There we go. Yeah, so let us know you guys are watching. Jessica, Catherine, Joe, thank you guys. Jan, Jenny, it's good to see you all. Thanks for letting us know that you're watching. That's not going to work. And question I have for you guys is, what have you learned this past week? What have you felt God has spoken to you from the sermon, from the morning devotionals, from the meditation moments, from your own reading, from your own life, your own interactions? What has stood out the most to you this week? And I invite you to share that here today. It's sort of a modified glory sighting, if you will. So as you guys share that, let us know you're here. We're going to jump in. Try to read your guys' posts along as we do. But my name is Aaron Stritzel. I work at Summit Church as the pastor for the Three Springs campus. And this is
Molly Stritzel, and I'm in the front office working as the ministry office coordinator.
Great. So that is a little bit about who we are. I realize I don't always introduce myself. And looking at everybody else's devotionals, they're way better at introducing themselves than I am. So, by the way, before we get started too, this weekend was originally planned to be Live Out Loud weekend. And obviously because of COVID and everything else, we had to postpone that. And so one of the things that the group, the leadership has invited us all into is to become aware of that and also find out if there aren't ways that we can use our own lives to live out loud, to be the presence of Christ to the world. So is there things that you can do this weekend and in this coming up week of ways to live out loud, to be the presence of Christ in the world? So Catherine, glad to be painting a mural on the wall for 2 days. It's visible north town, I think, north of Sirius, Texas, out that way. I saw some pictures and they looked amazing. Good morning, Johnny. So yes, live out loud. So quick recap as we begin today. This week, Pastor Jeff's sermon was on the courage to face the future. And if you haven't watched it, I would encourage you to jump in and watch it. That video, you can watch it, go into our website, summitchurch.org, summitchurchdurango.org. And there's a sermon button you can click on and watch it there.
Or on YouTube.
Or on Facebook now, or on Vimeo. So we're on multiple different places. Thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
Celia started off Monday and she talked about appreciating the humanity of every person. She invited us to draw a self-portrait, a portrait of ourselves, which she had a great little portrait of her. Mine would be probably worse than hers anyways. That sounded bad. That's, like, mine would be not anywhere close as good as hers. So she talked about her own art skills. Mine are not near as good as hers either way. So, and she encouraged us to draw a picture of someone else who has hurt us in some way. And underneath their picture that we draw, to write down Matthew 3:17, which is, "In the voice was heard from heaven, this is my beloved son with whom I am well pleased." Then Pastor Morgan talked about, well, first of all, she reminded us that the Chiefs won the Super Bowl. And so then she talked about the Ethiopian eunuch and this idea that God that story reminds us that God is always moving towards people and diverse people, reaching out to an African in the middle of a desert, that God is also always more. And I love that whenever we think we got God in a box, God seems to do something, say, I'm so much bigger than that. Hi, Barbara. Hi, Carrie. Thanks you guys for joining us. So Pastor Morgan talked about that. And then yesterday, Pastor Jeff talked about this idea of celebrating the differences while acknowledging that we are all one in Christ. And the common theme that I drew from that is the idea of God's love towards all, that God moves towards all kinds of diverse people. So today, the text is, if you're following along the meditation moments, which you can find on our website as well, but the text is Romans 3. I'm just going to read the first couple verses, 21 through 23. And it says this: by now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been disclosed and is attested by the law and the prophets, the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus for all who believe. For there is no distinction, since all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. There is this common theme in this text of all. There is no distinction. And really, in common theme throughout Paul's life, his ministry, what he did was really bring the gospel, this announcement that God loves all, moved beyond the Jewish people and tried to bridge this gap between Jews and Gentiles and say, no, God's love is actually for all, and all are invited to the table, and all people, which was obviously a major leap forward. It was a challenge, and people struggled to, first of all, understand and accept this, believe it was God. When you've lived a certain way for so long, it becomes embedded. And when somebody brings something else, it kind of critiques that and invites in a different perspective. Let's just be honest, for all of us, that's hard. It's not easy for us to be confronted with something different. But this was Paul's whole ministry, and people struggled with that. And Pastor Jeff read the verse yesterday. There's therefore now no Jew or Greek, male or female, slave or free, for we are all one in Christ Jesus. And I see much of Paul's life given towards that idea that, how we used to see things is accurate, but it's so much better than just that. That God's love transcends these things, which also brings back the Ethiopian eunuch that Morgan talked about. This African man with a different sexuality, God seems to intentionally go out of God's way to invite. So today, I thought we would talk a little bit about color. Pastor Jeff's sermon was addressing that, and obviously race, racial bias, and this idea of color is a big deal, and people are protesting, and people continue to protest. I think people are trying to bring an awareness to the forefront of all of our minds of some systemic problems that are going on. And so I asked my wonderful wife, Molly, if she would share. And she graciously said that she would share her experience just as a person of color growing up and what that means to her. So would you kind of introduce yourself as how you identify, then you experience growing up, and then even kind of the diversity and struggles that you shared now?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for creating the space for me to share. I will say it's a little easier doing it next to you. It's hard to talk about yourself. But I also want to acknowledge that I can't speak for the Black community. I can only speak for my own experience and my experience living in Durango and in Phoenix and Seattle. So that's my little disclaimer there. I hope to not misrepresent anyone. So I identify as multi-ethnic. My mom is from the Philippines. She was born and raised there. My dad is from the United States. He was born in Texas. And I was born in the Middle East. And so the first 5 years of my life, I spent in another country and with people of all sorts of races. from Pakistani people, from East Indians to Arabs to more Filipinos, Caucasians, Europeans. So that was like the first 5 years of my life. And I went to international school, and um, yeah, I didn't really have any other worldview except that one, a racially diverse one. Due to the circumstances around the Persian Gulf War, my family moved here to the United States, and we ended up in Durango. And I remember early on that there wasn't much racial diversity here. My mom, in particular, found community with two other women who were from the Philippines. Both women were born in the Philippines and then had moved here. So they were, I believe, first generation Filipinos that lived here. And we spent a lot of time with them, and that's who my mom connected with. Uh, at about, I think it was about the age of 7 when you start. I mean, developmentally, you are able to focus on other people. You see or and experience what other people are feeling, and it was that time that I experienced the shame of my own brownness. And how that came out really was my mom, who is very, very dark and loves to shop, would be racially profiled here in locally in town. And I remember her being accused of stealing, and we were with her, and I didn't understand why. Um, and then as I got older, I finally figured out, oh, it's because she's not white, she's brown, and I still didn't understand what that totally meant. And then it repeatedly happened, and then she would be on the receiving end of racist remarks about being Native American. People had mixed her up with the Native community, and I was again confused about that. And for me, what was confusing even more was our in our childhood, we would go to the Philippines every summer, and I received comments about my skin all the time, how beautiful and light it was. And even my own family would like pinch my nose because it's better to have more, not a flat nose. And then when I would come back here, sometimes I would be on the receiving end of, oh, how beautiful your brown skin is. And I was like, okay, should I be brown or should I be white? And these are like literally the thoughts of a probably 10-year-old at the time. And then as I got older, I enjoyed the sunbathing, and then I would go to the Philippines, and that was really shunned. Like, you don't want to make your skin darker. Like, white is beautiful. And then I learned that there's skin products you can use to whiten your skin, and I experienced a lot of people using that there. And so it's just growing up, I got a lot of mixed messages about my skin and how much it was a focal point for a lot of people, and I think that made me uncomfortable. And I think with the events that have just happened recently, I've made it a personal mission to explore um, racism and the anti-blackness within the Asian culture, and realize that that's been going on. And then I also realized that there's other racism within different Asian communities, and that's hard, and it's a very complex issue. But even some Filipinos are racist against Chinese, and I've experienced that firsthand from family members commenting. And it's not always just white against black. And so as I you know experience what's going on in the world these days, for me, how I've been kind of working through it all is to explore my own family history, and trying to own up to those things that are inherent within my own family dynamic, and just to be as educated as possible. And I think that's something we can all do, and I'm encouraging as many people to do, is to look back at your family tree and be humble and be like, this is where there is racism in my family, and then this is how I'm going to go forward to confront that, and to be different, and how I talk about race. And so, yeah, I guess that's kind of it in a nutshell. I didn't really have, there's a lot to my story, um, but I don't want to take up a lot of time. So,
No, that's okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I asked her to share a little bit about that because she shared recently, and I think it's important for us to hear different people's stories. And we use words like racism, and that feels harsh. And so somebody said maybe it's racial bias. It would be better received. I'm not sure. I think what it is acknowledging what I've experienced for white people is it's really easy then to just say, oh, that's not within me. I can't have any racial bias. I've been around people of color, or I'm married to somebody of color, or whatever. And I have felt as a white person to be invited into this a time of humbling and learning and listening. There's a reason why people are expressing the thoughts and opinions. There's a reason why people are protesting. Um, and I feel like, as people of faith, drawing from the book of James, who says, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. And I don't use that as a blanket statement for everybody, but as a white person, especially as a white male, I have taken that upon me in this season to say, oh, that should be my posture. There's so much reactivity, there's so much blame, and it's hard to understand, oh, there's a systemic things going on in the world. And there's probably things within me that I'm not aware. And just to give one quick story to illustrate one moment where I became aware, and to be honest, probably 99.9% of the time I'm unaware. But one story was Molly and I were sitting at a restaurant. We were having breakfast. It was a higher end place, an affluent place. It was a nice breakfast place, and I was just loving it. We love breakfast. It's like our favorite thing to do is to go out for breakfast, especially if we can do it without our kids. We love our kids, but it's nice to get away. And we were eating breakfast, and I was like, oh, I love this atmosphere. It's kind of a hip place too. And I was just commenting how much I loved it. And I could tell that Molly was like a little uncomfortable and not as energetic as I was, which usually she is because it's breakfast and we're like food and we're just the two of us. And I have no idea where our kids were. I don't know. Maybe they were at school that morning. And what did you say? Do you remember what you said to me?
I don't know. Was it like, look around? It's all white.
Yeah.
And every brown person is in the back.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like I fit in.
Yeah. And so I did. I looked around and realized, oh my gosh, everybody else is white. And there's only a couple other brown people, and they're working in the kitchen. And kind of ashamed and embarrassed to admit, sorry, I'm a little bit emotional today, but that I wasn't even aware of how my wife was experiencing that situation. And knowing then, like, how many times am I in situations like that where I'm just oblivious. And I don't think this is wrong, and I don't mean to shame anybody or to I just think it's a story, an example of an experience that I experienced one way, and my wife, as a person of color, was experiencing a completely different way. And not right or wrong, good or bad, just recognizing, oh, when my color of skin is represented in a place, predominantly, I am completely oblivious. And some people use this word colorblind as a good way. And there's some sociologists, a lot of sociologists, kind of pushing back and saying, actually, there's a negative connotation to that, meaning we don't see diversity. And that's what I experienced in the restaurant that day. And honestly, what I have been completely unconscious to so many times. And so I feel like the invitation as people of faith is to constantly learn. As Paul kind of pushed those boundaries out constantly, and God seems to be working through all kinds of different people. Diversity is a beautiful thing. Let's become more aware of our context. Let's become more aware of other people's experience, and instead of reacting against it, let's take the posture of learning, of saying, tell me more about that. Tell me more about your experience. I have two friends who are both African, don't know each other. And I sat and I asked them their experiences, and both of them hadn't had a lot of negative experiences, to be honest. But they had some experiences where they were walking down a street and people crossed the road to walk on the other side, or they went into a restaurant and somebody else got to order and receive their meals before them. And they're like, those kinds of things, they just kind of become so common and you're not always sure what's behind that, if they just needed to cross, and so you kind of just overlook it, but it's just part of their experience. And I mean, if somebody walks to the other side of the road, I think, well, it's because maybe I have my ferocious little puppy and they're scared or something. But it's a different experience. It's not ever because of my skin, right? I never think about that in that way. And so that's what I think one of the things we can do. And Durango's kind of um, insulated from a lot of that, but it's still here. It feels insulated, but it's still here. And we don't have as many people of color, but we do have First Nations, Native Americans. We have Hispanics. Those are I think the top two ethnicities that we have, and there's a small percentage of African Americans here. But I think as people of faith, we are invited to follow James. Can we be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry? So,
I just want to add that for me, one thing that has led me down these bunny holes that have been really good, and there have been good explorations really about race and diversity, is asking questions. You know, in that moment when we were in the restaurant, it was like, why is it set up this way? You know, what is it? I started asking, like, is the restaurant owner want to portray a certain image, or is there an economic advantage to have more of the people of the color in the backside? Are they paying them less? And then so then all these questions started happening, and then I'm like, okay, what structures are in place that, you know, maybe prevent certain people of color to accessing higher education? And for me, that's been a huge part of my education and exploration into. Sorry, I've got Enzo here. He's jumping out of my arms. Into trying to understand systemic injustice, because it's not blatantly out there. You know, you have to really dive deep into just stepping back and asking those kind of questions, and it will reveal itself when you do. And I'm by no means perfect and understand it all, but I find that when you have that posture of curiosity and you ask why and you just keep pushing why, it becomes more evident, and it has for me. And it's been kind of my mission to talk about it, systemic injustices. And so
then I'm reminded that we follow a man named Jesus who was a Middle Eastern brown guy, not a white European supermodel with wavy blonde hair. That if he were to come today, I wonder how we would receive and treat him. And he was a bit of a radical in his day. And his life, if we're to call ourselves Christians, always moved out to people who are on the margins, people whom the socio-religious economic system kind of pushed to the side. And Jesus constantly went out to them and says, no, there's something wrong about this whole system. right? And every time he ate with somebody, he ate with a tax collector, he ate with a prostitute, he ate with these people, he was welcoming them in as humans, as equals. And that is what we are invited to do as followers of Jesus.
Ooh, I have a question.
I was trying to end, but
Oh, I have a question.
uh-oh.
So how do we do what Jesus did now? You know, what is our eat with a tax collector moment?
You're not allowed to ask questions.
No, but you know me, I'm always like, what's practical? Like,
and I'm just like abstract.
So one thing that I've seen a lot lately that people have posted is go out and support Black communities in business. I think that's something that's tangible for me. Like, I'll support that and I can do that. Any others?
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
The other one I like is decolonize your library.
Your library.
That one I was like, ooh, good.
Yeah.
Since we have a lot of books in our house, we love to read.
Decolonize your library, meaning who are the authors that you read? Are they male, female? What is their skin color? And how do we get a diversity of perspectives? Because everybody has a different perspective. And we're stronger when we include those perspectives, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, other ones, and Pastor Jeff said this too, there's a lot of great stuff on Netflix and YouTube.
Yeah, we just watched 13th, and I was just blown away. I had no idea. And
highly recommend 13th.
Recommend. Yep.
Just about a criminal justice system kind of post civil rights movement up until now, and how the criminal justice system has worked. And the systemic things are hard because they're all around us. It's like a fish swimming in the water. We don't always see it. And we need other people and those kinds of documentaries and other voices and other perspectives to help us see the areas where we maybe missed the mark. In the Christian tradition, we call that sin. And so there's things that I do as an individual, but there's also systemic things. And actually, many would argue Jesus cared more about those big systemic things than the individual little things. So, yeah. I want to close.
No more questions.
No more questions. You're not allowed to ask questions. No, just kidding. Ask lots of questions. I'm going to close with our focus scripture, memory verse in Psalm 62, verse 5. And I'll read it to you in a prayerful, reflective way. And perhaps one of the things, in light of everything else that's going on in our world, maybe you can find a little silence and get away and kind of settle yourself. If you find yourself watching too many news things, on social media too much, and you're getting worked up, I found myself there a little bit and kind of getting worked up or overwhelmed, or all of those emotions all together. Maybe you can find a little time in silence. And we invite you again to reflect in the comment section. Share your experiences. Share what you have learned this week. And even after the video is done, we'll still go on and we'll still learn, and people can still see it. So it's important for us to learn from each other and to encourage each other that we're growing in this together. So thank you, Carrie, for sharing that. So I want to close with this in a posture of whatever is comfortable for you. Take a couple of deep breaths. Psalm 62, verse 5. For God alone, my soul waits in silence. For my hope is from him. For God alone, my soul waits in silence. For my hope is from him. I think my hope as we conclude our time here this morning is that we continue to wait, to listen, to learn, to not be reactive, to also be careful how we react, to take a posture of humility and learning in this time. And so thank you all for joining us today.
Mm-hmm.
And for Molly, myself, and our little puppy Enzo, may you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday and find ways this weekend and this coming week to be the presence of Christ, to live out loud in your own way.